All right, so yeah, I basically created a chart that is going to change the way that you see dating forever. I kind of had this visualization in my head, and then I used ChatGPT to bring it to life. And it's like super illuminating. I think this is going to help you guys a lot. So I created a chart that's going to show sexual market value and willingness to settle over time. And then it's going to be a comparison on the chart between men and women. So let me like break it down and explain it to you, kind of show you how to interpret this, and yeah, like basically, how to like take away some like powerful dating psychology from it. So all right, on the very far left hand side, this is going to be your age. And then, on the axis here, all the way up is going to basically be like intensity. So it goes from 0 to what, like 60 years old, basically. So, all right, if you check it out on the very beginning at about, 0 years old, this red solid line here is going to be a woman's sexual market value. And then this blue solid line here is going to be a man's sexual market value. This red dotted line is going to be a woman's willingness to settle. And then the blue dotted line is going to be a man's willingness to settle. So, in the beginning, right, like sexual market value is going to start at a very like similar place, basically zero. Like when you're first born, nobody has any sort of like sexual market value. But you'll see even like early on, the men or the women start ahead of the men. Um, maybe on some like fucking crazy weird ass like Epstein shit. I don't know if I can say that, but it's not until about, let's see, 18 ish to 20 years old that you're going to actually see any like real movement here. And you'll see that a woman's sexual market value actually begins to like spike up and peak like very, very quickly into the early 20s. And a man's sexual market value stays basically kind of flat. Like it essentially is going to stagnate. And it actually doesn't even really begin to like go up and start like creeping upwards until around mid 20s is when it starts to go up. And then you'll see that the peak, and this is actually like backed by like science according to different things like wealth accumulation and like hormonal, biomarkers and stuff. A man's like peak doesn't happen until like 40, or around like 35 to 40. And then a woman's is anywhere from like 20 to like 25. So the interesting thing to realize there is that when it comes to like actual SMV, it doesn't cross like a man. It kind of like inverses, right? Like a man and a woman's SMV kind of cross over each other around this like 30 years of age, where like at 30 years, the average man is now becoming more like valuable in the dating marketplace than the average woman. So we'll get to more of that in a second, but let's talk about like willingness to settle. And what that means is, basically exactly as it sounds, like willing and ready to like consolidate your efforts onto one individual, and whether that's, have a family or have a child, enter into like, basically what's exclusivity or monogamy. And so I think it's interesting how like, a man and a woman's willingness to settle initially would be very high. And I do believe that that is because of like lack of experience and then naivety. And so the danger, to look out for here is that a woman's willingness to settle like might start off in a similar place as a man, like all the way up until about 20 years old ish. And then it's going to sharply decrease, below where a man's willingness to settle is going to be. And so what this highlights is the unique danger of getting married or settling young. Because what you want to notice is that anytime your willingness to settle is higher than hers, this is putting you at an extremely strategic disadvantage. Because, like what it basically means is that you are now at risk of being the less valuable party and being, no longer like valuable enough to keep, which is going to leave you, yeah, heartbroken or single or whatever the case might be. So if you're in your teens, you might think, oh, this woman is as willing to settle as I am, and this is such a great idea. And then as you get into your 20s, your SMV isn't really going as fast as hers, right? Hers is quickly accelerating at this point. and then her willingness to settle is actually going down. And that's why you see, a lot of these divorces that happen in this 23 to 27-year-old range from people that got married young is because like they were kind of naive. Like the man was naive about where this was going to go. Like he didn't have the foresight. So this can actually like give you foresight. And so you'll see that a man's willingness to settle doesn't come down. Like obviously it's opposite of your SMV. Like the higher your SMV is, the lower you are, the less willing you are to settle. So it doesn't cross over. A man's willingness to settle and then a woman's, hers doesn't start coming up while his is going down until again, like right at about that 30 years old inflection point. And so what you'll see is that a man's willingness to settle is, at its lowest around 38 years old. And so now a woman's is going higher. And if you're choosing, as long as your willingness to settle is lower than hers, this is like the optimal choosing range and area. So let me show you how to like perfectly interpret this and like what this ultimately means. What it ultimately means is that you don't want to, you definitely don't want to like get into a, like you don't want to settle until you're past 30 years old as a man, basically. So if you're a man, you're going to strategically wait. Like the smart thing to do is strategically wait as a man until like about 30 years old when your SMV is high, and then a woman's, willingness to settle is coming up and yours is at its lowest. That's what gives you kind of like that, leverage where you're the adored in the relationship. Like she looks up to you, she admires you, and you're essentially, like the prize, right? Because men are a little bit more like loyal than women, so like it's just that's just how relationship dynamics works. Like men aren't quite as like opportunistic. So what it means is that the best thing for you to do as a man is begin to establish leads for marriage between 30 to 35. And what you're looking for is these women that are basically kind of in between this age of like 30, like well, I guess you could say like their SMV is the highest here, but their willingness to settle is going to be about the same. So you kind of want to wait until her SMV. You don't want it like necessarily at the peak. Like what matters more is like willingness to settle differential. So you're kind of looking to catch women between the ages of like 26-ish to 30, so that you're getting them right as they're kind of like exiting, on the off ramp of their SMV, then the on ramp of willingness to settle. So you're getting, really basically like the best deal. So yeah, let me know what you guys think. Like, don't get married until after 30, and don't wait too far past like 35 to 39. Hopefully that makes sense. Let me know what you guys think in the comments.